The static crackled through the headset at 3:47 hours, cutting through the humid Afghan night like a blade through silk. Lieutenant Commander Zara Ghost, Kestrel, adjusted her night vision goggles, the green-tinted world of the cockpit becoming sharper as she banked her AH-64D Apache longbow 30 degrees starboard. Below, the mountains of Helmand Province stretched endlessly, their jagged peaks casting shadows that could hide entire armies. "Phantom 6, this is Overwatch," came the voice through her comms, tinged with the kind of exhaustion that only comes from 72 hours without sleep. "We've got eyes on your approach vector. Package delivery is hot. Repeat, package delivery is hot." Ghost's gloved fingers tightened imperceptibly on the cyclic stick. Package delivery. Military speak for what was about to become either a routine extraction or a bloodbath that would make the evening news. She'd done this dance 47 times before, but something felt different tonight. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. "Copy, Overwatch. Phantom 6 inbound, ETA 4 minutes." Her voice carried none of the tension coiling in her chest like a serpent ready to strike. Years of training had taught her to keep emotion locked away, buried beneath layers of protocol and procedure. The back of her mind, she could still hear the briefing from 6 hours earlier. Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Sledgehammer Torino had looked at her with those steel-gray eyes that had seen too much war, his weathered face creased with skepticism. The other SEALs had exchanged glances, subtle, but she'd caught them. The same look she'd been getting for 8 years, ever since she'd graduated top of her class from flight school and been assigned to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. "Listen up, people," the intelligence officer had begun, spreading aerial photographs across the table like tarot cards predicting doom. "Target is a compound approximately 2 clicks southwest of Forward Operating Base Chapman. High-value target confirmed inside. Taliban commander responsible for 17 IED attacks in the past month. Our boys have been tracking him for weeks." Sledgehammer had leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow across the maps. "Extraction needs to be clean and quiet. No room for rookie mistakes." His eyes had found hers across the table, and though he hadn't said it, the implication hung in the air like cordite after a firefight. Ghost had simply nodded, her expression betraying nothing. She'd learned long ago that proving herself required more than words. It required flight paths that defied physics and decisions that separated the living from the dead. Now, streaking through the Afghan night at 180 knots, she felt the familiar weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders like a lead blanket. The Apache's twin General Electric T-700 GE-7, a 1C turboshaft engines hummed their deadly lullaby, each revolution bringing her closer to a moment that would either cement her reputation or end her career. The darkness ahead held secrets, and Ghost was about to discover just how deep they ran. Through her headset, she could hear the SEALs conducting their final equipment checks, their voices a mixture of confidence and barely controlled adrenaline. They didn't know her yet, not really. They saw the call sign Ghost on the mission roster and assumed it referred to her slight frame or quiet demeanor. They had no idea it had been earned in the skis over Syria, where she'd vanished into a sandstorm and emerged behind enemy lines to extract a downed pilot, while surface-to-air missiles painted deadly arcs across the twilight sky. The compound appeared on her thermal imaging system like a glowing constellation against the cool desert floor. 3 buildings arranged in a rough triangle, with guard towers at each corner, and a central courtyard that would serve as the landing zone. Standard Taliban stronghold architecture, designed to funnel attackers into killing fields while providing maximum defensive coverage. Ghost had studied similar layouts in a dozen different countries, each one a puzzle waiting to be solved by superior firepower and tactical precision. "Phantom 6, Overwatch. Be advised, we're picking up increased radio chatter from target location. They might know we're coming." Ghost's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Intelligence leaks were the bane of special operations, turning surgical strikes into desperate battles for survival. She began running contingency scenarios in her mind, each one mapped against the terrain features scrolling past her canopy. Copy that, Overwatch. Phantom 6 maintaining approach vector. She keyed her intercom to speak with her co-pilot and gunner, Chief Warrant Officer 3 Jake Bulldog Morrison, whose steady hands on the weapons systems had saved their lives more times than either cared to count. Bulldog, you catching this chatter about increased activity? Morrison's voice came back steady as granite. Roger that, Ghost. I've got the 30 loaded with mixed rounds, Hellfires are hot, and the chain gun is tracking beautifully. Whatever they're planning, we'll be ready. That confidence was part of what made Morrison such an effective gunner. He never questioned her decisions, never second-guessed her flight paths, and never let gender politics interfere with the deadly mathematics of aerial combat. In the cockpit of an Apache, there were only pilots who could hit their targets and pilots who became targets themselves. Morrison had learned which category Ghost belonged to during their first mission together, when she'd threaded the aircraft between two mountain peaks with less than 6 feet of clearance on either side to avoid a shoulder-fired missile. The radio crackled again, this time with Sledgehammer's voice cutting through the static like a machete through jungle undergrowth. Phantom 6, Alpha Team Leader, we're 2 minutes out from target. Need you to paint the guard towers with your laser designator so we can assess defensive positions. Copy, Alpha Leader. Beginning target illumination now. Ghost adjusted her sensor suite, the sophisticated targeting system identifying and cataloging potential threats with computer precision. On her multifunction display, the compound transformed from a collection of buildings into a detailed tactical map showing fields of fire, escape routes, and potential casualty-producing areas. What she saw made her blood run cold. The intelligence reports had been wrong, catastrophically wrong. This wasn't a standard Taliban compound. The defensive positions were too sophisticated, the guard towers too well positioned, and the entire layout suggested military engineering far beyond anything the local insurgents possessed. Someone with advanced tactical knowledge had designed this fortress, and Ghost was beginning to suspect that someone was expecting them. Overwatch, Phantom 6. I'm seeing significant discrepancies between intel reports and actual target configuration. This place is built like a fortress, not a safe house. The pause that followed stretched longer than Ghost liked. When Overwatch finally responded, she could hear the tension in the controller's voice. Phantom 6, we copy your assessment. Mission parameters remain unchanged. Alpha Team is committed to assault. Translation: they were going in whether it was a trap or not. Political considerations and operational timelines had taken precedence over tactical wisdom, a decision that had killed more special operations personnel than enemy action ever would. Ghost felt the familiar knot of frustration forming in her stomach, the same feeling she'd experienced in Syria when intelligence failures had nearly cost her everything. Below them, the SEAL team was approaching the compound perimeter, their night vision signatures barely visible even through Ghost's thermal imaging system. 8 of America's most elite warriors, moving through the darkness like lethal shadows, completely unaware that they were walking into what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated ambush. The weight of their lives settled onto Ghost's shoulders like a mantle she'd worn too many times before. She began calculating alternative approaches, backup extraction routes, and emergency procedures that weren't in any manual. Tonight was going to require more than training and protocol. It was going to require the kind of flying that separated legends from casualties, and Ghost could feel the familiar electricity of impending chaos beginning to build in her chest like a gathering storm. The mission clock showed 3:51 hours. In 9 minutes, everything would change. Ghost's targeting system locked onto the first guard tower, her laser designator painting the structure with invisible light that appeared like a glowing crosshair through the SEAL's night vision equipment. The guards were alert, their movement patterns suggesting they were expecting trouble. Professional discipline kept their positions, but she could see the subtle tells of nervous energy, weapons held too tightly, heads turning too frequently toward likely approach routes. Alpha Leader Phantom 6, Guard Tower Alpha is painted. I count 2 personnel, AK-47s, and what looks like a PKM machine gun. They're definitely spooked about something. Sledgehammer's response came back clipped and professional. Copy, Phantom 6. Moving to position for assault. Stand by for further tasking. Through her night vision, Ghost watched the seals flow across the landscape like water finding the path of least resistance. Their movement was poetry written in violence, each step calculated to avoid detection while maintaining tactical flexibility. She'd worked with dozens of special operations teams over her career, but the SEALs possessed a particular brand of lethal efficiency that never failed to impress her. The second guard tower came into her targeting reticle, this one positioned to cover the main approach route to the compound. 2 guards here as well, but these were different. Their posture spoke of combat experience, their weapons handling professional. Ghost felt the first cold fingers of certainty crawling up her spine. These weren't local Taliban fighters. These were foreign advisors, possibly Pakistani ISI or Iranian Quds Force operatives with advanced military training. Overwatch, Phantom 6. I'm seeing indicators of foreign military involvement at target location. Guard positions and defensive preparations are consistent with professional military engineering. Another pause. Another decision being made by people who wouldn't have to live with the consequences. When Overwatch finally responded, their voice carried the weight of orders that had come from far above their pay grade. Phantom 6, mission parameters remain unchanged. Alpha Team has authorization to proceed. Ghost keyed her intercom to Morrison. Bulldog, you catching the tactical picture down there? This is starting to look like a setup. Morrison's voice carried the calm professionalism that had made him one of the most sought-after gunners in the regiment. I see it, Ghost. Question is, are we going to sit here and watch our boys walk into a meat grinder, or are we going to do something about it? That was the question, wasn't it? Official orders versus tactical reality. Protocol versus the lives of 8 men who were trusting her to keep them alive. Ghost had faced similar decisions before, and each time the choice came down to the same fundamental calculation. What could she live with, and what would destroy her if she did nothing? Stand by, Bulldog. Let me see what options we have. She began analyzing the compound's defensive layout with the cold precision that had earned her the reputation as one of the most innovative tactical pilots in the service. The guard towers provided overlapping fields of fire that would turn the central courtyard into a kill zone once the shooting started. Standard assault doctrine called for suppressing those positions with overwhelming firepower, but something about their placement nagged at her tactical instincts. The towers were positioned to funnel attackers toward the main building, creating a natural choke point that could be easily defended. But they also created a blind spot, a narrow corridor along the eastern wall where the angles of fire didn't quite mesh. It would require precision flying that pushed the Apache's maneuverability to its absolute limits, but it might provide the element of surprise that could turn a potential disaster into a successful mission. Ghost pulled up her navigation display, plotting waypoints that would take her aircraft through a flight path no sane pilot would attempt. The margin for error would be measured in inches rather than feet, with mountainous terrain on one side and enemy fire on the other. One miscalculation, one moment of hesitation, and she'd be adding her name to the memorial wall at Bagram Air Base. Alpha Leader, Phantom 6. I've identified a potential ingress route that might give us tactical surprise. It'll require some unconventional flight profiles, but it could work. Sledgehammer's response came back skeptical. Define unconventional, Phantom 6. Ghost smiled grimly in the darkness of her cockpit. The kind that they don't teach at flight school, Alpha Leader. Trust me on this one. The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know about what the SEALs thought of her tactical capabilities. She'd heard that silence before, the pause that came when experienced warriors tried to decide whether to trust their lives to someone they viewed as unproven. In 30 seconds, she was going to show them exactly why her call sign was Ghost. Alpha Leader, beginning approach now. Recommend your team hold position until I complete the reconnaissance pass. Negative Phantom 6. We're moving to assault positions now. Time window is closing. Ghost felt her jaw muscles tighten. The SEALs were committed to their approach, which meant she had perhaps 3 minutes to identify and neutralize the defensive positions before 8 of America's finest walked into what was shaping up to be a perfectly orchestrated ambush. The mathematics of the situation were brutally simple. Either she found a way to tip the tactical balance, or good men were going to die in the next few minutes. She pushed the Apache's nose down, beginning a descent that would take her below the radar coverage of any shoulder-fired missiles, while positioning her for the attack run she was already visualizing. The aircraft responded like an extension of her will, 30 tons of sophisticated death machinery dancing through the night sky with the grace of a hunting falcon. Bulldog, I need you to designate targets in sequence as I call them out. We're going to hit this place like a ghost in the machine. They're 1 second, gone the next, leaving nothing but confusion and dead enemies in our wake. Morrison's chuckle came back through the intercom, carrying the kind of confidence that only came from flying with someone who had never let him down. Roger that, Ghost. Just point us where you want the hurt to go, and I'll deliver it with surgical precision. The compound filled her windscreen, guard towers, and defensive positions, becoming individual targets rather than abstract threats on a map. Ghost could see muzzle flashes beginning to flicker from the perimeter as the SEALs made contact with the outer security elements. The battle was beginning, and she was about to discover whether 8 years of doubt and skepticism had been justified, or whether she was about to remind everyone why they called her Ghost. The radio erupted in a cacophony of combat communications as the SEALs engaged the enemy. Contact front, taking effective fire from Guard Tower Alpha. Sledgehammer's voice cut through the chaos with practiced calm, but Ghost could hear the strain underneath. They were pinned down, caught in the exact killing field she'd predicted. Alpha Leader, Phantom 6 inbound hot. Keep your heads down. Ghost rolled the Apache into a knife-edge turn that pushed the aircraft's structural limits, diving toward the compound at an angle that would have sent most pilots reaching for their ejection handles. But ejection seats were a luxury attack helicopters didn't possess. When things went wrong, pilots like Ghost had to fly their way out of trouble or become statistics. The first guard tower flashed past her canopy so close she could see the surprise on the gunner's face as 30 tons of American military engineering materialized out of the darkness like a mechanical banshee. Morrison's 30 chain gun spoke once, a 3-second burst that turned the tower into a cloud of splinters and smoke. The PKM machine gun that had been raking the SEAL's position disappeared in a shower of sparks and screaming metal. Tower Alpha neutralized, Morrison reported with satisfaction, moving to Tower Bravo. But Ghost was already executing a turn that defied everything she'd ever been taught about helicopter aerodynamics, pulling G-forces that made her vision tunnel and her anti-G suit inflate like a desperate embrace. The Apache groaned under the stress, warning lights flickering on her instrument panel as she pushed the aircraft beyond its design specifications. The second guard tower erupted in a ball of orange flame as a Hellfire missile found its mark, the explosion lighting up the compound like a photographer's flash. Ghost pulled up hard, trading altitude for the speed she'd need to survive the inevitable counterattack that was coming. Phantom 6 Alpha Leader, outstanding work. We're moving to the main building now. Ghost's tactical display showed the SEALs advancing across the courtyard, their movement suddenly fluid and confident now that the suppressing fire had been eliminated. But her threat warning system was screaming, multiple radar signatures painting her aircraft as priority targets for whatever surface-to-air capabilities the enemy possessed. Bulldog, I'm picking up search radars from multiple locations. These guys came prepared for air support. Morrison was already identifying the radar sources, his targeting system painting invisible crosshairs on launchers that had been carefully camouflaged among the compound's defensive positions. I count 4 SA-7 launch positions, plus what looks like a ZU-23 anti-aircraft gun hidden behind that wall. They've been planning this party for a while. The realization hit Ghost like a physical blow. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a trap specifically designed to lure American air support into a carefully prepared kill zone. The Taliban commander they were supposedly capturing was nothing more than bait, dangled in front of American intelligence services like a worm on a hook. Overwatch Phantom 6. This is a setup. Repeat, this is a deliberate setup designed to target our aircraft. Recommend immediate abort. The response came back with bureaucratic certainty that made Ghost's blood pressure spike. Negative, Phantom 6. Mission continues. Alpha Team is committed. Committed. The same word that had sent thousands of American servicemen to their deaths when political considerations overrode tactical reality. Ghost could abort, pull back to a safe distance, and wait for the inevitable disaster that would follow. Or she could do what she'd been trained to do, adapt, improvise, and overcome obstacles that lesser pilots would consider impossible. She chose the path she'd always chosen when faced with impossible odds, the path that had earned her the call sign, Ghost, in the first place. Bulldog, how much ammunition do we have left? Plenty of 30, 2 Hellfires remaining, and a full load of 2.75-inch rockets. Why? What are you thinking? Ghost was thinking about a maneuver she'd only attempted once before, in a training exercise that had resulted in a formal reprimand from her commanding officer, and a recommendation that she never attempted again under operational conditions. It was called the Impossible Loop, a tactical maneuver that involved using the Apache's momentum and the laws of physics to create a moment of tactical advantage, so brief it could only be measured in heartbeats. I'm thinking it's time these people learned why they call me Ghost, she replied, pushing the Apache into a climb that would take her directly into the teeth of the enemy's air defense network. The surface-to-air missiles began launching almost immediately, white contrails streaking through the darkness like deadly fireworks. Ghost counted 4 separate launches, each one locked onto her aircraft's heat signature with computer-guided precision. In approximately 15 seconds, 20 pounds of high explosive would turn her Apache into a cloud of burning debris scattered across the Afghan desert. Unless she could do something that had never been attempted in combat, something that existed only in the theoretical realm of advanced flight dynamics and the fevered imagination of test pilots with more courage than sense. She pulled the Apache into a vertical climb, trading every ounce of forward airspeed for altitude, while the missiles closed the distance with mathematical inevitability. At the peak of the climb, with the aircraft hanging motionless in space for a single impossible moment, Ghost initiated the maneuver that would either save the mission or add her name to the casualty reports. She rolled the Apache inverted and pulled the collective to maximum, beginning a powered dive that would take her through a complete 360-degree loop in the vertical plane. The missiles, programmed to intercept an aircraft following predictable flight paths, lost their target lock as Ghost's Apache disappeared from their guidance systems like a magician's trick. The first missile passed harmlessly overhead, its proximity fuse failing to detonate as the target it had been tracking simply vanished from the engagement envelope. The second missile, confused by the radical change in the Apache's flight profile, detonated prematurely in a shower of orange sparks that briefly turned night into day. The third and fourth missiles, their guidance systems overwhelmed by the impossible maneuver they were trying to track, began chasing each other in increasingly erratic circles before finally running out of fuel and falling harmlessly into the desert. Ghost completed the loop at barely 50 feet above ground level, the Apache's rotor wash kicking up a cloud of dust and debris that obscured her aircraft from the remaining defensive positions. She was now behind the enemy's prepared positions, approaching from an angle they had never anticipated and couldn't effectively engage. Bulldog, paint everything that moves. We're going to end this right now. Morrison's targeting system began identifying and cataloging every defensive position in the compound, his fingers dancing across the weapon's control panel with practiced efficiency. The chain gun began its deadly work, 30 depleted uranium rounds chewing through defensive positions like a mechanical buzzsaw through balsa wood. The Zu-23 anti-aircraft gun that had been carefully positioned to engage helicopters approaching from the standard vectors never got the chance to fire. Morrison's first burst turned it into twisted metal and screaming fragments, the crew's bodies disappearing in a cloud of pulverized concrete and steel. The remaining SA-7 positions tried to reorient their launchers to engage Ghost's aircraft from its new position, but the Apache was moving too fast and too close to the ground for their targeting systems to establish a reliable lock. Morrison methodically eliminated each position with single, precise bursts from the chain gun, his years of training and experience evident in every shot. Alpha Leader Phantom 6, all defensive positions neutralized. You have a clear path to the objective. Sledgehammer's response carried a note of something Ghost had never heard in his voice before: respect. Outstanding work, Phantom 6. I don't know how you did that, but you just saved 8 American lives. Ghost felt a flush of satisfaction that had nothing to do with ego and everything to do with the knowledge that good men would be going home to their families, because she had refused to accept the limitations that others tried to impose on her capabilities. But the mission wasn't over yet. The real objective, the Taliban commander, was still somewhere in the compound, and until he was captured or killed, the SEALs remained in danger. Alpha Leader, be advised I'm picking up heat signatures from the main building. Looks like multiple personnel, possibly including your primary target. Copy, Phantom 6. We're moving to clear the building now. Stand by to provide close air support if needed. Ghost maintained her orbit around the compound, her sensors continuously scanning for threats, while Morrison kept the weapons systems trained on potential target areas. The Apache's sophisticated electronics painted a detailed picture of everything happening inside the compound, from the SEALs' methodical advance through the building to the panicked movement of enemy personnel trying to escape through hidden tunnels. What she saw on her thermal imaging display made her realize that this mission was even more important than the briefing officers had indicated. The compound wasn't just a safe house. It was a command and control center for Taliban operations throughout the region. The intelligence windfall from capturing this location intact would be worth far more than the elimination of a single high-value target. Overwatch, Phantom 6. I'm seeing significant intelligence opportunities at target location. Recommend Alpha Team prioritize document recovery and equipment capture. Copy, Phantom 6. Alpha Team has been advised. The next few minutes unfolded with the methodical efficiency that characterized special operations at their finest. The SEALs cleared the compound room by room, securing documents, computers, and communications equipment while Ghost maintained overwatch from above. The Taliban commander and his advisors were captured alive, along with a treasure trove of intelligence that would lead to dozens of follow-up operations throughout the region. But for Ghost, the real victory wasn't the successful completion of the mission. It was the radio transmission that came from Sledgehammer as the SEALs prepared for extraction. Phantom 6, Alpha Leader. I don't know where you learned to fly like that, but I'd be honored to have you on my team anytime. That was some of the finest combat flying I've ever witnessed. High praise from a man who had served with the best military aviators in the world. Ghost felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the adrenaline of combat, and everything to do with the recognition that she had finally proven herself to the warriors she respected most. "Thank you, Alpha Leader, just doing my job." But even as she said it, Ghost knew that what she had done tonight went far beyond the requirements of her job. She had pushed the boundaries of what was possible, taken risks that no reasonable person would accept, and achieved results that would be studied and debated by military aviators for years to come. As the SEALs loaded their prisoners and captured intelligence onto the extraction helicopter, Ghost began thinking about the after-action report she would have to write. How did you explain a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible? How did you document tactics that existed outside the boundaries of established doctrine? The answer came to her as she watched the extraction helicopter disappear into the darkness, carrying 8 American warriors and their invaluable cargo back to safety. You didn't explain it. You simply did what was necessary to bring everyone home alive. The rest was just paperwork. Phantom 6 Overwatch. Mission complete. Return to base. Ghost banked the Apache toward home, the familiar weight of a successful mission settling onto her shoulders like a comfortable jacket. Behind them, the compound burned with fires that would be visible for miles, a funeral pyre for the Taliban's regional command structure, and a beacon announcing that American military might could reach anywhere, anytime, regardless of the obstacles placed in its path. As they flew through the pre-dawn darkness, Morrison's voice came through the intercom with quiet satisfaction. "Hell of a thing, Ghost. That loop you pulled back there, I've never seen anything like it. Where'd you learn to fly like that?" Ghost smiled in the darkness of her cockpit, remembering another night, another impossible situation, and another group of people who had needed someone to do the impossible. Syria, 2018. But that's a story for another day. The lights of Bagram Air Base appeared on the horizon like a constellation fallen to Earth, marking the end of another mission and the beginning of what Ghost suspected would be a very different kind of reputation. Word of tonight's action would spread through the special operations community like wildfire, carried by the voices of 8 SEALs who had witnessed something unprecedented in the skies over Afghanistan. For the first time in her career, Ghost looked forward to the debriefing that would follow. Tonight, she had finally silenced the doubters and proven that excellence in combat had nothing to do with gender, politics, or preconceived notions. It had everything to do with skill, courage, and the willingness to risk everything when lives hung in the balance. The impossible loop had become possible, and Lieutenant Commander Zara, Ghost, Kestrel had become a legend. The debrief room at Bagram Air Base buzzed with an energy that Ghost had never experienced before. Usually, post-mission discussions were clinical affairs, focused on tactical lessons learned and procedural improvements for future operations. Tonight felt different. Tonight felt electric. Master Chief Sledgehammer entered first, his massive frame filling the doorway as he scanned the assembled personnel with those steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. Behind him came the rest of Alpha Team, 7 other SEALs whose reputations in the special operations community were nothing short of legendary. These were men who had operated in every major conflict zone of the past decade, warriors whose recommendations could make or break careers. Ghost stood at attention as they filed in, her flight suit still bearing the stains of hydraulic fluid and cordite residue that marked another successful combat mission. Beside her, Morrison maintained the same professional bearing that had made him one of the most sought-after gunners in the regiment. "At ease," came the voice of Colonel Patricia Hendricks, the 160th SOAR commander whose own reputation for tactical innovation had paved the way for female aviators in special operations. "We're here to discuss what happened tonight, not to conduct a formal inspection." Sledgehammer was the first to speak, his gravelly voice carrying none of the skepticism that had characterized their earlier briefing. "Ma'am, I've been working with military aviators for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what Lieutenant Commander Kestrel accomplished tonight. That maneuver she pulled, I don't even have words for it. One of the other SEALs, a compact man with the call sign, Viper, whose expertise in demolitions was matched only by his reputation for tactical analysis, leaned forward in his chair. "Ma'am, we were dead. I mean dead to rights finished. They had us pinned in a kill zone with overlapping fields of fire, and we were looking at a catastrophic casualty situation. Then Ghost shows up and does something that shouldn't be physically possible." Colonel Hendricks turned her attention to Ghost, her expression unreadable. "Lieutenant Commander, I've been reviewing the preliminary flight data from your aircraft. The G-forces you sustained during that vertical maneuver exceeded the Apache's design limitations by a significant margin. Care to explain how you accomplished that without structural failure?" Ghost had been dreading this question, knowing that her answer would either validate her actions or result in a formal investigation that could end her career. "Ma'am, the maneuver was based on theoretical flight dynamics I studied during my aerospace engineering coursework. I calculated that the Apache's structural integrity could handle the stress loads for approximately 3 seconds, which was just enough time to complete the loop and evade the incoming missiles." Morrison spoke up from beside her. "Ma'am, if I may add, I've flown with Ghost for 2 years, and her understanding of aircraft capabilities goes way beyond anything they teach in flight school. She doesn't just fly helicopters, she understands them at a level that borders on intuitive." The room fell silent as Colonel Hendricks considered this information. Ghost could hear her own heartbeat in the stillness, each pulse marking the seconds that would determine whether her career advanced or ended. Finally, the colonel spoke. "Lieutenant Commander, what you did tonight was either brilliant tactical innovation or dangerous recklessness. The fact that it worked doesn't automatically validate the decision to attempt it. What was your thought process when you chose to execute that maneuver?" Ghost straightened, meeting her commanding officer's gaze with the same steady confidence that had carried her through 8 years of proving herself in a male-dominated field. "Ma'am, I had 8 American warriors on the ground who were about to be killed by an enemy that had superior positioning and firepower. Standard attack profiles would have resulted in the loss of my aircraft and left the SEALs without air support. The tactical situation required an unconventional solution, and I executed the only maneuver that could provide the element of surprise necessary to neutralize the threat." Sledgehammer nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what happened, ma'am. Ghost didn't just save our mission, she saved our lives. And she did it by thinking outside the box when everyone else would have followed standard procedures straight into a disaster." Another SEAL, whose call sign, Shadow, reflected his expertise in reconnaissance and surveillance, pulled out a tablet displaying satellite imagery of the compound. "Ma'am, the intelligence we recovered tonight is going to lead to major operations throughout the region. The Taliban commander we captured has been coordinating attacks across 3 provinces, and the documents we secured include detailed plans for a major offensive that was scheduled to begin next week." Colonel Hendricks studied the satellite images, her expression gradually shifting from concern to something approaching admiration. "So what you're telling me is that Lieutenant Commander Kestrel's unorthodox tactics not only saved the immediate mission, but potentially prevented a significant escalation in enemy activity." "Yes, ma'am," Sledgehammer replied without hesitation. "In my professional opinion, Ghost's actions tonight represent the kind of tactical innovation that separates good pilots from great ones. She saw a problem that couldn't be solved with standard procedures, and she found a way to solve it anyway." The colonel turned her attention back to Ghost, and for the first time since the debrief began, Ghost saw something that looked almost like a smile tugging at the corners of her superior officer's mouth. "Lieutenant Commander, you realize that what you did tonight is going to be studied by military aviators for years to come. The tactical flying community is going to want to understand how you executed that maneuver and whether it can be safely incorporated into our standard procedures." Ghost felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in years, The possibility that her innovations might actually be recognized and adopted rather than dismissed as dangerous departures from established doctrine. Ma'am, I'd be honored to participate in any analysis or training programs that might result from tonight's mission. Morrison leaned forward, his face animated with enthusiasm. Ma'am, if you're looking at incorporating Ghost's tactics into our training curriculum, I'd like to volunteer as the primary instructor for weapons systems coordination. What she did tonight required perfect integration between pilot and gunner, and I think we could develop training protocols that would give other crews similar capabilities. Viper spoke up again, his demolitions expertise lending credibility to his tactical observations. Ma'am, from a ground perspective, the psychological impact of Ghost's maneuver was almost as important as the tactical results. When she appeared behind enemy lines after seemingly disappearing from their targeting systems, it created confusion and panic that lasted long enough for us to gain fire superiority. That kind of disorientation can be a decisive factor in close combat situations. Colonel Hendricks stood, signaling the end of the formal debrief portion of the meeting. Lieutenant Commander Kestrel, I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross for your actions tonight. Additionally, I'm assigning you to lead a tactical development team that will work with our training division to analyze and potentially incorporate your maneuver into our advanced combat flying curriculum. The room erupted in applause from the SEALs, men who rarely showed emotion expressing their approval for recognition they clearly felt was long overdue. Ghost felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with personal recognition, and everything to do with the knowledge that her innovations might help save other warriors in future conflicts. Sledgehammer stood and extended his hand, his grip firm and respectful. Ghost, I owe you an apology. I walked into tonight's briefing thinking you were just another aviator looking to punch her ticket with some special operations time. I was wrong, and I'm man enough to admit it. You're one of the finest combat pilots I've ever worked with, and I'd trust you with my life anytime. The other SEALs lined up to shake her hand, each offering their own words of respect and gratitude. These were warriors whose approval couldn't be bought with politics or favoritism. It had to be earned with blood, sweat, and proven competence under fire. As the room began to clear, Colonel Hendricks approached Ghost with a manila folder containing what appeared to be classified documents. Lieutenant Commander, there's something else we need to discuss. Your actions tonight have attracted attention from some very senior levels of the military hierarchy. There's a possibility that you may be offered some unique opportunities in the near future. Ghost accepted the folder, feeling its weight both literally and figuratively. Ma'am, I'm honored by the confidence you're showing in me. Whatever opportunities might arise,